What you need in the building: young champions with less than 17 fights, less than 20 fights, are accomplishing quite a lot in the sport of boxing today. A great example of this is Vasily Lomachenko. In 16 fights, he had 15 championship fights against the likes of Gary Russell Jr., Roman Martinez, Nicholas Walters, Jason Sosa, Guillermo Rigondeaux, Jorge Linares, Jose Pedraza, and Anthony Corolla, as well as Teofimo Lopez and Orlando Salio. And he broke records to do so, becoming a 2-divisional champion in just 7 fights and a 3-divisional champion in just 12 fights. Beating Gary Russell Jr. for the featherweight title, Rocky Martinez for the super featherweight title, Jorge Linares, Jose Pedraza, and Luke Campbell for the unified lightweight titles. A feat that's never been done in boxing before. Let's look at Canelo for comparison. Canelo Alvarez has a whopping 56 fights, and of them, only 15 were championship fights. And even though he has faced more world champions than Vasily Lomachenko, it must be noted that the caliber of opposition back-to-back was not as a high standard as Vasily Lomachenko's was. And even though he became unified light middleweight champion, as well as WBC middleweight champion twice, being unified champion against Gennady Golovkin, and then going up to the 3rd division at light heavyweight and beat Sergey Kovalev, the level of competition still wasn't at the level that Vasily Lomachenko has had. When we look at Terrence Crawford, another pound-for-pound fighter, in 36 fights, he's only had 14 championship fights, again showing you that the level of competition that Vasily Lomachenko did on a repeated basis was actually stiffer than even Terrence Crawford had. And that's why some people put Vasily Lomachenko ahead of these guys in the pound-for-pound list, because it's still 36 fights that Terrence Crawford has had. And you can look at any other champion in boxing today, and you'll realize that they had these fights to build them up to the championship fights. Take, for instance, Tyson Fury. How many championship fights has he had? Only 2 in his career. You look at Errol Spence Jr., great unified champion as well. But how many championship fights has he had? He's only had 5 championship fights. So you have to understand that Vasily Lomachenko has done something that's really, really incredible in that respect. Gennady Golovkin, of course, 42 fights, of which he's only had 12 championship fights. Nowhere near the level of competition that Vasily Lomachenko faced. Neither did Anthony Joshua, the most respected of the heavyweights, because he's the one that actually has more titles. He's the more unified champion. And even so, he doesn't have or match the level of fights that Vasily Lomachenko has had on a repeated basis. WBF is now stepping into the fray. He's another fighter, as is also Teofimo Lopez, who have under 20 fights and yet have accomplished so much in their careers. You also look at Josh Taylor, has done quite a lot to unify 2 titles in his career, but again, back-to-back fights, not as stringent, not as difficult as Vasily Lomachenko. The great Juan Francisco Estrada and Roman Gonzalez, multiple weight champions, great champions, but yet, once again, not as stiff a competition back-to-back fights, even though there's a case to be made that Roman Gonzalez has faced pretty stiff competition down the stretch. In fact, Roman Gonzalez has an incredible resume, seeing that he is a 5-divisional world champion, moving up from minimum weight all the way up to super flyweight. And of course, these 2 guys will be banging with each other very, very soon in their next fight. Tank and Leo Santa Cruz, highly respected fighters, but once again, haven't faced that level of competition consistently in their careers, having, again, fights above 20 fights. Now, Inoue, on the other hand, is something like Vasily Lomachenko. He has had some tough fights and tough matchups for most of his career. He has been the WBC light flyweight champion, the WBO super flyweight champion, as well as the WBA and IBF bantamweight champion. Alexander Usyk has accomplished quite a lot in his career already. He has become the undisputed cruiserweight champion and the only undisputed cruiserweight champion to defend his title in the history of boxing. Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao is another great and another pound-for-pound fighter, but he has had 71 fights, and in his 71 fights, yes, he has fought 20 world champions, and he's done remarkable things going through 8 different divisions. But even he hasn't had back-to-back stiff competition quite like Vasily Lomachenko.